The smell of burning fat and expensive incense hung heavy in the Parisian air, but it wasn't coming from the kitchens of the nobility or the altars of Notre Dame. Beneath the floorboards of a nondescript house on the Rue de la Beauregard, a woman draped in crimson silk stood over a makeshift altar that would make the bravest soldier in the King's Guard lose his footing. This wasn't a prayer for health or a simple charm for luck. It was a transaction of the most depraved order. In the flickering, oily candlelight, the woman known to the underworld as La Voisin was brokering a deal between the highest levels of the French aristocracy and the darkest corners of the occult. But the real horror wasn't the ritual itself. It was the list of clients tucked away in her iron-bound ledgers. Names that sat right next to the Sun King, Louis XIV, in the halls of Versailles were now being whispered in a basement filled with arsenic and human remains. We like to think of the Grand Siècle as an era of enlightenment, powdered wigs and rigid etiquette. But behind the gold leaf of the palace walls, a silent war was being waged with vials of inheritance powder and black candles. This is the story of the affair of the poisons, a scandal so deep and so depraved that it nearly toppled the most powerful monarchy in Europe. We are going to peel back the velvet curtain to see how a network of fortune tellers, failed priests, and midwives turned the court of France into a slaughterhouse, and why the king himself eventually had to burn the evidence with his own hands to save his legacy. If you find yourself drawn to the shadows of history and the secrets empires try to bury, you'll want to stay with us as we uncover the true price of power in the 17th century. The year was 1679 when the polished facade of the French Empire began to crack, but the rot had been setting in for a decade. To understand how the most sophisticated court in the world descended into devil worship and mass murder, you have to understand the pressure cooker that was Versailles. Louis XIV had created a system where your entire life depended on the king's favor. A single nod from him could make your fortune. A cold shoulder could ruin your family for generations. This environment didn't just breed ambition, it bred a level of desperation that bordered on insanity. When traditional political maneuvering failed, when your rival was prettier, or your husband lived too long, the courtiers turned to a more permanent solution. It started with a series of mysterious deaths among the nobility that the authorities couldn't explain. Healthy men and women were dropping dead with no signs of struggle, their bodies turning black and emitting a foul stench within hours of their passing. The doctors were baffled, but the streets were whispering a name for the cause: inheritance powder. It was a polite term for arsenic, and in the mid-1770s, business was booming. Before we descend further into the tunnels of the Parisian underworld, if you're into stories that expose the hidden gears of power and the darker chapters of the past, consider subscribing to the channel. We dig into the files that empires wanted to remain closed, and your support helps us keep these investigations going. Now, to truly see the scale of this darkness, we have to look at the woman who sat at the center of it all. Catherine Monvoisin, or La Voisin as she was known to her terrified and devoted followers, wasn't just a common criminal. She was a brilliant, albeit twisted, entrepreneur of the macabre. She had started her career as a simple midwife and a fortune teller, using a bit of palmistry and basic psychology to fleece the lower classes. But she quickly realized that the wealthy had far bigger problems and far deeper pockets. Her clients didn't just want to know the future, they wanted to control it. They wanted lovers to return, rivals to vanish, and fathers to die so they could claim their estates. La Voisin built a massive laboratory in her garden, disguised by high walls and the constant noise of the city, where she distilled poisons and composed love philters. But it wasn't just chemistry. She realized that her clients needed the theater of the occult to justify their crimes. She provided the bridge between the refined world of the Louvre and the grit of the Parisian slums. Knowing exactly which defrocked priest would perform a black mass and which apothecary wouldn't ask questions about a bulk order of toxic chemicals. The authorities only caught wind of the scale of this operation by a stroke of pure, drunken luck. In the early months of 1677, a woman named Marie Beauce, a rival fortune teller to Voisin, was overheard at a dinner party bragging about her lifestyle. She was intoxicated on expensive wine and began laughing about how she had made a fortune selling special potions to the aristocracy. She joked that after 3 more successful poisonings, she'd be able to retire in luxury. It was a fatal mistake. One of the guests at that party reported her to the police, and the thread began to unravel. The man tasked with pulling that thread was Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie, the Lieutenant General of Police in Paris. De la Reynie was a man of cold logic, a pioneer of modern policing, who believed that even the shadows could be measured and catalogued. He arrested Marie Beauce, and under the pressure of the dungeon, she pointed her finger directly at Voisin. When de la Reynie's men finally raided Voisin's home in 1679, they didn't just find a collection of herbs and vials. They found a furnace filled with the charred remains of infants and a ledger that contained the names of the most powerful people in France. This was the birth of the Chambre Ardente, or the Burning Court. It was a special tribunal established by the king to investigate the plague of sorcery and poisoning, so named because the courtroom was draped in black and lit only by torches to create an atmosphere of divine judgment. But as the suspects started talking, the atmosphere shifted from one of justice to one of sheer panic. De la Reynie realized he wasn't just dealing with a few disgruntled wives or ambitious sons. He was holding a political time bomb that could destroy the monarchy. The prisoners, when subjected to the question, a series of brutal tortures designed to break the will, started naming people that the police were technically forbidden from even investigating without the king's personal sign-off. The web stretched from the gutter to the very bedchamber of Louis XIV. The most explosive testimony centered around a woman who was considered the unofficial Queen of France, Françoise Athénaïs de Rochechouart, the Marquise de Montespan. For years, she had been the king's official mistress, the true queen in the eyes of the court, possessing a wit and beauty that held the Sun King captive. But by the late 1670s, her position was under threat. Younger, fresher faces were appearing at court, and Louis's eye was notoriously wandering. The investigation revealed a horrifying possibility. Montespan hadn't just relied on her charm to stay in power. According to the testimony of Voisin's daughter and a defrocked alcoholic priest named Abbé Guibourg, Montespan had been a regular client of the occult underground for nearly a decade. The allegations were so dark, they bordered on the unbelievable. They claimed that Montespan had participated in multiple black masses, ceremonies intended to bind the king's heart to her forever. In these rituals, which supposedly took place in darkened rooms across Paris and even in secret locations near Versailles, the Marquise would allegedly lie naked across an altar while Guibourg performed a perverted version of the Catholic Mass over her body. The most harrowing detail, provided by witnesses who had nothing left to lose, was the claim that infants were sacrificed during these ceremonies. Their blood was supposedly drained and mixed with flour and ground up insects to create a love powder that Montespan would then slip into the king's food and drink. It sounds like a gothic horror novel, but for de la Reynie, it was a legal nightmare. If the king's mistress was a murderer and a devil worshipper, what did that say about the king himself? Louis was the most Christian king, the representative of God on earth. To have his children's mother linked to the ritual slaughter of infants was a stain that no amount of gold leaf could cover. As the investigation into the year 1680 deepened, the king's reaction shifted from curiosity to horror. He had initially supported de la Reynie's crusade, wanting to purge the sorcerers from his city. But as the names of his own inner circle, the Comtesse de Soissons, the Duchesse de Bouillon, and even marshals of France, began to fill the dossiers, Louis realized that the truth was more dangerous than the crime. There are signs that the king began to intervene in the judicial process, steering the investigators away from certain high-profile targets. Some historians argue that the accusations against Montespan were a fabrication, a plot by the poisoners to save their own necks by implicating someone so important the king would be forced to stop the trials. Others point to the consistency of the testimonies given by people in separate cells who had no way of communicating with each other. It's possible that Montespan was truly that desperate, or perhaps she was simply a victim of the very atmosphere of paranoia she helped create. Voisin herself met her end in February of 1680. She was sentenced to be burned at the stake in the Place de Grève, the traditional site for the execution of heretics and high-level criminals. Eyewitness accounts from the time describe a woman who remained defiant until the very last second. She reportedly fought the executioners, screaming obscenities at the crowds who had gathered to watch the famous witch die. She refused to confess, even as the flames began to lick at her crimson dress. With her death, the king hoped the scandal would simmer down, but the fire had already spread too far. De la Reynie was a man of integrity, and he refused to stop his work just because the names were getting uncomfortable. He continued to collect evidence, and by 1682, he had compiled a massive archive of testimony that pointed squarely at the king's mistress and the wider corruption of the court. That was the moment the Sun King decided to extinguish the light of justice. Louis XIV ordered the Chambre Ardente to be permanently closed. He didn't just stop the trials. He took the most incriminating ledgers, those containing the detailed testimonies against Madame de Montespan, and burned them in his private fireplace. He watched as the names of the dead infants, the recipes for the poisons, and the descriptions of the black masses turned to ash. He then issued a series of edicts that fundamentally changed French law. He officially declared that magic and sorcery didn't exist, reclassifying witches as mere frauds and poisoners as common criminals. By doing this, he stripped the occult of its power, turning a cosmic battle between good and evil into a simple matter of police business. It was a brilliant move of propaganda. If the king says magic isn't real, then his mistress couldn't have used it. But the human cost was staggering. While the high-ranking nobles were often just banished from court or sent to their country estates, the lower-class conspirators, the maids, the minor alchemists, and the street-level fortune-tellers were dealt with ruthlessly. Over 30 people were executed, and hundreds more were imprisoned for life in the dampest dungeons of the Bastille and the fortress of Vincennes. Many were kept in chains, their names removed from all records, effectively becoming the disappeared of the 17th century. As for Madame de Montespan, her fall was slow and agonizing. She wasn't executed or even publicly disgraced, but she lost the one thing she had killed for, the king's favor. Louis could no longer look at her without seeing the shadow of the altar. He gradually replaced her with Madame de Maintenon, a woman who was the polar opposite of the fiery Montespan, pious, quiet, and seemingly beyond reproach. The king moved the court permanently to Versailles, creating a world where every noble was under his constant supervision. He turned the palace into a gilded cage where the only way to survive was to follow the rules of the sun. The affair of the poisons was a turning point for the French Empire. It marked the end of the chaotic, semi-feudal world where nobles could act with impunity and the beginning of the modern centralized state. But it also revealed the terrifying psychological toll of absolute power. When one man holds the keys to everyone's destiny, the people around him will resort to anything, even the unthinkable, to keep his attention. We may never know exactly how many people died in the Garden of Voisin, or if the love powders really did contain the ingredients the witnesses described. The records that survived tell a story of a society that was rotting from the top down, a world where the line between a prayer and a curse was as thin as a silk thread. The king may have burned the papers, but he couldn't burn the memory of what his court had become. The legacy of the inheritance powder remained a ghost in the halls of Versailles long after the fires of the Chambre Ardente had gone out. It forced a king who believed he was a god to realize that he was surrounded by humans who were all too capable of playing the devil. It showed that the real danger to an empire isn't always an invading army or a peasant revolt. Sometimes it's a vial of clear liquid and a desperate heart in the room next door. If you enjoyed this journey into the darker side of the Grand Siècle, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation into the secrets of the world's most powerful dynasties. The history they want us to remember is written in gold, but the history that actually happened is often written in blood and ash. What do you think? Was Montespan a mastermind of the occult? Or was she just a convenient scapegoat for a king who needed to hide his own failures? Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one.